What's going on, everyone? So the New Orleans Pelicans are in quite the predicament, right? What do they do with Brandon Ingram? They are currently trying to shop Brandon Ingram and look for the right trade to unload him. But so far, there isn't really this line out the door, try to acquire Brandon Ingram, which makes a lot of sense, right? Brandon Ingram, his injury history has not been great. He also, based on reports, is looking for a contract in the $200 million range. And it's like, is he really worth the max? Look, he is an excellent player, excellent talent, but he's not your number one player. He might not even be your second best player. Probably closer to like your third option. If he's your third option, you're probably a very good basketball team. But with just the history that he's had the last few years in particular, he's just not worth the money that he's looking for and command. Now, is there a team that may take a chance and may give him the money? Sure. I mean, we've seen teams kind of go like, maybe it'll be different with us and, pay a guy what he wants. But it's also, what is the return that New Orleans would get for Brandon Ingram? Obviously, it's better to get something rather than nothing. Obviously, it's better to kind of, even if you don't get the package in return that you're hoping for, get anything rather than him walking out the door. I mean, look at like the Clippers with Paul George. Hey, they had offers, no, we don't want, and he ends up leaving, and now they're probably, are they even a playoff team at this point with Kawhi Leonard, who just left Team USA because his knees are shot. Now, the New Orleans Pelicans pulled off a great trade, in my opinion, in adding Dejounte Murray, but how much better does Dejounte make New Orleans? Now, I do think Dejounte Murray with Brandon Ingram makes them better. I mean, Dejounte, CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Zion would be quite the interesting, big four, and then whoever they end up slotting in at the center position. But if you're basically just swapping Dejounte Murray for Brandon Ingram, I don't know how much better that makes you if you're New Orleans. I think it makes you slightly better. I think just because the Pelicans really needed a point guard, but I don't know if that's something where it's like, wow, the Pelicans are significantly better without Brandon Ingram and with, a guy in Dejounte Murray. Now, if you could turn Brandon Ingram into the right pieces, now maybe you're talking. But again, question is there. One of the teams that has been kind of linked to Brandon Ingram, just in the sense of interest, not necessarily that they're making a push or they're even trying to trade for him, but, kind of just gauging, right, is the San Antonio Spurs. Now, Brandon Ingram on the Spurs, I do think is interesting. However, I do think, one, what is the cost? If I'm the Spurs, I'm reluctant to give up any type of significant package. But if you have to give up like a Keldon Johnson and, a couple things, then sure, go get Brandon Ingram. And two, can you convince him to take less? Right? Like if he wants, say, $30 million a year, right? If you could get him on like a 4-year, $120 million, right? Or maybe he's willing to take a smaller deal. Maybe he's willing to take 2 years or 3 years, let's say at $90 million with, the third year a player option or something. To where it's like, I can prove myself, I can stay healthy for the next 2 years. Right? I wouldn't hate something like that if you could get him on the cheaper end. But if you can't, then I don't think that the Spurs should even entertain the idea. But I do like the idea of, bringing in a Brandon Ingram, having him with like a Harrison Barnes, Victor Wembanyama, Chris Paul, and, Devin Vassell. And now I think like you have quite the squad. Are you a contender? Probably not. I mean, the more likely than not, you're not, unless, Victor Wembanyama just really takes some strides. But there was an argument to be made last year that he was already like a top 15 player because of his impact on the defense side of the ball and then also the offensive side, right? And you got to imagine he's going to take some strides. He's going to be better in many areas. And Chris Paul just by himself, I think, is going to make Victor that much better. But it would be nice to kind of add that length, his versatility on both sides of the basketball, but also give you a guy that can just go get a bucket, particularly in the mid-range, right? You can move Harrison Barnes to the 4 if you wanted to, or even play Brandon Ingram at the 4, but I'd probably keep him at like the 3. Kind of go, like I said, Chris Paul, Vassell, Ingram, Harrison Barnes, and then Victor Wembanyama, and kind of roll that out and see what it looks like. If guys can stay healthy, San Antonio, I think, would be very tough, right? Because at the end of the day, Ingram is still a guy, go get you 25, 5 and 5 on even on a mediocre night, right? He's a guy that could make a real impact with the San Antonio Spurs. That length would be so interesting, slotted alongside Victor and Vassell and stuff. There's this talks of, Lauri Markkanen, and San Antonio is interested in Lauri Markkanen. And I do think Lauri Markkanen would be the better just natural fit. I do also kind of like the idea of Markkanen and Victor Wembanyama. However, the cost, is it worth it, right? Because he wants a max 2. And again, I don't think Lauri Markkanen is worth a max either. He has some injury history. And, also, you look at, just what is he? Is he your second best player long term? Especially if you're paying him $40+ million. If you're paying him that, you're looking for him to be essentially your second best player long term, right? And you have to give up probably several firsts, like 4 or 5 firsts, plus giving up young players. It just, to me, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze for a Lauri Markkanen trade. If Brandon Ingram you could get for, a quarter of the price of what you could get for, or what you'd have to give up for a Lauri Markkanen, then I think it's worth at least taking the risk. What's the worst case is that, if you don't have to give up several picks, right? Let's say you're giving up, an unfavorable first that you're just because at some point you're going to have to start consolidating assets and guys and stuff. When you take a little risk on Brandon Ingram, and if it works, it's okay, cool. Maybe you sign him long term if he shows he can be healthy this year. If it doesn't and he walks, worst case, you free up a bunch of cap space. I don't hate that idea either. Especially if you're look, I like Keldon Johnson. I think he has some potential, but he's never going to be anything more than just a backup for the Spurs. He's never going to, I don't believe he's really going to work his way into the starting unit, right? And kind of the big holes that you could argue is the 4 or the 3, right? Because Victor Wembanyama and his versatility, you either A, get a center and you slide Victor to the 4, B, you get a small forward and you slide, a Harrison Barnes to the 4, Brandon Ingram, or you get a 4, you keep Harrison Barnes at the 3, and then you keep Victor at the 5. But you could also just get Brandon Ingram and again, kind of have him slot as your 3 and then move Harrison Barnes to the 4. So I don't hate the idea. It's not my favorite, but if you told me tomorrow that the Spurs traded for Brandon Ingram, I wouldn't be upset about it. I'd be very intrigued to see how it works. To me, it boils down to the cost. What does it cost you to pair Ingram with Victor Wembanyama, right? Because, I do like the idea of having that long, lengthy, versatile wing in Brandon Ingram to pair alongside Victor, right? And all the ground that he covers. You slot Harrison Barnes at the 4, his versatility, you got all this switchability, you got all this length, you got all this size, you got guys that could shoot across the board, you got several guys that could put the ball on the deck and just go get a bucket, and then you got Chris Paul just kind of facilitating and orchestrating it all. Sounds pretty good to me, right? That sounds like a pretty good position to be in if you're the Spurs. But again, ultimately, it has to be at the right price, and you're hoping that you can convince Ingram to take less, which very well could be the case based on the market, right? Brandon Ingram can only get $40+ million if somebody is willing to give him $40+ million. If no one is willing to give him that, well then at that point you're in good shape, right? It's what is the most that somebody's willing to give him? Right? If a team is willing to give him maybe $35 million, depending on which team it is, you being in Texas, state tax and stuff could be the deciding factor. So again, I like, if you can get Brandon Ingram for 25 to 30 million a year, that I think is worth it. All right, that I think that Brandon Ingram is worth some money. He's just not worth 40 million because again, like, he's not. I don't believe he's your first or second option. I think he is probably closer to your, third option. And, depending on, like, if Victor really does become the clear-cut best player in the league, then I think Brandon Ingram could potentially be your second option. But again, realistically, I think if he's your third option, you're probably a very good basketball team. And he is still young enough to where you can have him for the next several years and he could still make an impact. He could still be significant. He could still do a lot out there on the basketball court for you. So to me, it's like, if you can work it out to get him at the right price, I think you take the risk. I think the risk would be worth the reward. And if it works out, like I said, you keep him. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion. Pass question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? How do you feel? What are your thoughts? Do you like the idea of going and bringing in Brandon Ingram, kind of taking a flyer on him? Do you think no, stay away from Brandon Ingram? How do you feel? Whatever your thoughts are, let me know. Love to hear it. Let me down in the comments section below. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. Helps me a lot. So we enjoy these types of videos, and I truly appreciate it. Now subscribe to the channel, hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one. Thank you.